Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, The Novel Nana. I'm Bex. Today is part 2 of my whiteboard series, I guess, of how I develop my characters. In the last video, I took you through the first 2 steps, which is conceptualization and also the bare bones. So today, in this video, I'm going to kind of walk you through my process of fleshing out the character and then clothing my character. So I'm going to get started. We're going to jump right into the video and we'll see how this goes. Okay, I did go ahead and prepare it ahead of time so I wouldn't waste so much time writing it out and you wouldn't have to stare at the back of my head. So, again, this is my character development. This is my process. You don't have to do it this way. This is what works for me because I'm one of those people, as I said in my last video, I'm an overwriter. I'm an overthinker. So I tend to use more. And when I am, first conceptualizing a character, I kind of throw everything at it and see what sticks, what stands out to me, and then I can kind of take away or pick apart what I don't need or what I don't use. So for starters, I like to kind of make myself a general list, and I kind of go through each and everything and just write, 1 or 2 sentences, sometimes only a word, but it helps me to better understand the type of character that I'm trying to create. So, with that in mind, let me see if I can, let's try to move this one out of the way. There we go. Hopefully that won't fall, and if it does, it's okay. So I'm going to put this up here on my fireplace. Let's see if you guys can see that. I'm going to try to pull you in just a little bit. I'm sorry about the glare from the ring light, guys. There's really nothing I can do about that. But, okay. So, part 3, as I said, was fleshing out my character. Now, there is a long list here, and I'm just going to try my best to go through them quickly. And if you do want a more in-depth video, let me know in the comments. I'll be more than happy to delve in a little deeper. But for now, let's just start with a few words of each thing, and I'll just kind of read them and just, follow along. So, okay, fleshing out my character, which is my 3rd step when I create a character. The first thing I like to ask myself is, what is their background? What is their history, their lineage, or heritage? This oftentimes can play a big, huge role in the character's development. For instance, their background. There's a lot of things that go into a person's background, and as a lot of us know, sometimes things happen in our childhood that are really driving forces of who we actually become and how we develop over time. And depending on how young you are when something happens in your past or your background, it can set you off on a path that maybe otherwise you wouldn't have traveled on. But anyway, I do like to think of the background of my character, their history, their lineage or heritage oftentimes can help as well. I ask myself, where did they grow up? What region are they from? What state or country or city or town? Because if you ask yourself, did they grow up in a city versus, a more rural area, such as the countryside, those are going to be 2 very different lifestyles, not only in their upbringing, but also in the types of jobs in their community, maybe, their transportation in that community, their just overall community-wise, this can often play a big part of who someone is and their views upon the outside world. So, city versus country. But not just city versus country, but those are some of the things that I often look at. So then I ask myself, their financial bracket or social status, or what are the social norms? And this can be individually or family, because if a character, say their family, if they are maybe a struggling family or a poor family, that's going to be a lot different in their history or background or upbringing as opposed to maybe a rich family, or even, say a princess in a kingdom would be different than, a pauper in the village. So you need to keep those things in mind, or at least I do, when I'm trying to figure it out. Also, social norms. Now, I use this term kind of loosely, but what I mean by this is, let's see if I can give you an example. Okay, let's say the social norms maybe for a college community could be extremely different, literally the other side of the coin from, say, an Amish community, or maybe a, Jewish community versus, say, a non-religious specific community. The social norms for those are going to be different in your upbringing and what you witness and things like that. So I know that's probably not a great example, but it was the first one off the top of my head. So anyway, let's move on to education level, or the lack thereof. Now, again, this plays a big part when you're fleshing out your character and thinking of their background and their history. Because their education level or lack thereof oftentimes can form your character, their personality traits, maybe how they view the world. It can generally affect their speech, their intellect. Say you are from, okay, for example, I'll use my own father for this example. My father grew up in the country, grew up on a farm. And back in those days, you were more expected almost to, not really further your education. When you got to be a certain age, it was more important, more vital to learn the family trade or help out with your family's income. So my father left school in the sixth grade. And went to work on the farm. So that's just one example. But he didn't get a higher education. So maybe the education level or lack thereof doesn't actually have to mean that they're ignorant or anything like that. But maybe even the difference between a high school dropout or a high school graduate, or a someone that has a college degree, or a bachelor or a master's. There are going to be differences from one to the other that could help form your character, and how they behave, how they perceive the world, how they act, how they speak. So this is something very important to keep in mind. Also, family traditions. I do like to include this because me being from a family that did have traditions, I like to include those kind of things in my books because it makes it feel more realistic to me. So I like to keep in mind the family traditions. This doesn't actually have to revolve around holidays or anything like that. It could be as simple as, say, in my family, the children were often named after a relative, or in my case, my family, my brothers were named directly after my father. My sister was named directly after my mother. They have the exact same name. So and my middle name, I'm named after my aunt. So anyway, that's a tradition in our family. Also a tradition is that we gather, or used to, when my grandparents were alive, we would gather for literally at least once or twice a month. And it didn't have to be a special occasion. We would just gather at their house and, have a family meal. We played music. My family is really musically inclined, play a lot of string instruments, and whatnot. But that was a tradition for us, singing and playing music. So anyway, so think about the family traditions, if there are any, if there's any that you would like to include. This is just something that, you know, or maybe a family tradition could even be as simple as, you know, teaching your child to drive. Like, you know, maybe the dad, maybe he thinks, you know, that's his job, is to teach his child to drive when they get of age. So anyway, on to ethnicity and race. I like to include this when I'm fleshing out my character, because this can really clue you in a lot on values and, well, just, you know, culturally. It can play a huge difference in how your character is formed and also how your character might be viewed. So I do include that. And again, culture. Now, I used to have a friend that was part of the gypsy culture. I'm not sure the correct term. I was very, very small. I think I was in, I want to say first or second grade. But their lifestyle, their culture was really predominant in the way they dressed, in the way they spoke, in their way of socializing. It was just a very rich culture. So this could also play into your character. Now, if you have maybe a culture of nomads, you know, if they have that nomadic lifestyle, that could also be something that, you know, you could play into your character. Maybe, for instance, let's see, what's another cultural one that could be? I can't think of anything right off the top of my head because I'm looking at all this down here that I still have to get through, and I don't want to make this video too long, but I think you get the general idea. Cultures, where you come from, how you're raised, this can be a very significant indicator or factor for your character and how they explore the world. So keep that in mind. Also, religious beliefs or belief system or lack thereof, this could play a part in your character as well. How big of a part is totally up to you. Now, their moral compass and standards or values, this is also another thing that you should consider, or at least I consider when I'm writing my characters, because you have to remember that not everyone has the same morals or values or standards as you do. Not every character is going to be the same. And that is where that diversity really plays in, because not everyone thinks the same. You know, we are all individuals, and your characters should represent that individuality. So please keep that in mind. That's something that I keep in mind. Also, you think about their skills or trades or hobbies or travels or exposure. These could also come into play later in your story. You know, someone, a character that has been exposed to other cultures, other communities, other countries, if they travel a lot, or even an army brat, you know, they're going to have different experiences from someone, say, that lives in the sticks. You know, it's not going to be the same for each character. And this could be a very big part in how they're raised, how they view the world, how they view themselves, how they view order, or whatever. The list could go on and on. So these are some of the things that I like to keep in mind, and we'll just keep going, guys. So then we think about experiences or traumas or pivotal moments. Now, someone who has not had a traumatic past may act differently in crowds than someone, say, who was, you know, exposed to something in their past that was traumatic for them, or that changed them, or maybe they witnessed something that changed them from that point on. That is a pivotal moment. Or maybe, say, they went from, you know, having sight, and then maybe one day they're horseback riding and fall off the horse, or standing behind a horse and the horse kicks them, like Little House on the Prairie with Mary. I don't know if y'all remember her, but she was kicked by a horse, and from that point on she was blind. So that is a pivotal moment. That is also, you know, could be considered a trauma or a very unique experience. So keep those things in mind when you are fleshing out your character, because everyone's experiences are going to be different, because everybody lives different lives. You know, each life is your own to live, and your experiences are really going to be tailored to what you personally have been through. So keep that in mind when you're trying to create your characters, as far as their experiences, their traumas, or pivotal moments, if any. Okay, so then we move on to sexual experience or lack thereof. So I do like to include this one simply for the fact that everyone has been, to high school or junior high, and you know of ones that were a little more on the promiscuous or wild side, and some that were very, conservative or just lacking for whatever reason, maybe by choice. But anyway, that can also play a very important role for your character in how they view relationships, or, their experience or lack thereof may affect their romantic, what's the word I'm looking for here? Their romantic partners or their love interests, how they approach relationships or intimacy. So, which is the next one, intimacy and relationships. Now, when I speak of intimacy, I'm not just speaking of the sexual nature of intimacy. In this case, I like to think about the relationships and intimacy levels between families, first and foremost. Because, for example, my husband, his family, they are not big on public shows of affection, or even as far as household, privately inside of their own home. They didn't say "I love you" to one another. They didn't hug or embrace one another. My family, complete opposite. Literally, if we haven't seen each other, whether it be 5 minutes or 5 years have passed, no matter what, we would always greet each other by hugging each other's neck, well, not neck, but that's, here in the South, that's what we call it. Come here, let me hug your neck. But, I am from a big family. I have a lot of brothers. I have a few sisters. But regardless of how long it had been since we had seen one another, my brothers would come in, they would hug me, kiss my cheek. Even if they were, coming in for a visit from out of state or whatever, we would greet each other as soon as they got here with hugs and kisses and "I love yous." And then again, as we parted ways, or when they left, again with the hugs and the "I love yous." So we were very outspoken in that sense. That was our intimacy levels. Not all families are that way. My husband is a testament to that. They are very different. My husband found it so strange that we were so openly affectionate with one another. But anyway, I'm totally getting off track. But this is what I mean when I say intimacy in relationships with your friends or family or other. This is what I'm talking about. So keep that in mind also with your character, because that can also really shape who they are and play a big part of that character's development within the story. Again, there are some people, that don't like PDA. They don't. It's not a natural response for them. So you do need to keep that in mind. Okay, so expectations of life and relationships. Now, this is something you want to keep in mind, or at least I do. Like I said, this is just some of the things that I try to keep in mind when developing my characters. You don't have to do this, but, if it helps, great. If I'm giving you some ideas to think about, that's wonderful. If not, sorry guys, this is just the way I do it. Okay, so anyway, expectations of life and relationships. Now, someone who has a, maybe a sunny disposition might view life very differently than someone who maybe sees the glass as, half empty. So optimism versus pessimism. But anyway, that's one thing to view how they view lives and relationships. Someone who has grown up in a family where their parents, were high school sweethearts, fell in love, got married, started their family, and are still together, 50 years later or what have it, might see relationships and life very differently than someone who, say, grew up without a father or grew up without a mother or lost a parent or, maybe grew up in a volatile or unhealthy, household, or a child that might have grown up in, say, like an adoptive family, like a foster parent situation, or maybe even in an orphanage, or nowadays I think they call them something else, but the foster care system or whatever, might view life and relationships very differently. Someone who's been together for a long time, or their parents have been together for a long time, versus someone who is from a broken home or a divorced family, or even currently in that situation of their parents getting divorced, would see things and relationships and life very differently. So do keep that in mind. Okay, also, I like to consider, when fleshing out my character, the expectations, the views on life, death, politics, government, society, and etc., etc. So again, all of these things are going to affect how they view life, how they view the politics, in their community or government or society. It's also going to have a different view on maybe death, how someone perceives death. There's this old saying, and I know that I'm going to butcher it, so I'll just give you the gist of it. There's an old thing where, you close your eyes and they say, someone says, picture, or I'm going to give you two words. You tell me which one comes to mind when you think of the word that I give. So they say black and white. Which one do you picture when you think of death? So there are going to be some that think of blackness. There are going to be some that think of light. It's all in your own perception. So those can vary. Moving on. So then I like to consider, when fleshing out my character, is their goals. That could be immediate goals. That could be, life goals. That could be goals in their school, or goals for themselves. That could be whatever. Goals, guys. Okay, so goals, dreams, fears. A lot of times people forget to include things like that. And I find it a very interesting way to weave into your story by bringing out that side of them. What are they afraid of? And fears are different than phobias. You do need to remember that. Maybe someone has a fear of heights, but they have a phobia of being buried alive, so their phobia would affect them, say if they were in, I don't know, a mine shaft or whatever, that could trigger that for them. Or even a fear of closed spaces, say your character maybe got thrown into a trunk. That would really intensify that fear or that phobia. Sometimes they can be interchangeable, but you guys get the gist. Anyway, so then goals, dreams, fears, phobias, talent, and doubts. So these are all things that you can always weave into your story to show another side of your character. So these are things that I keep in mind, as I said, when I'm fleshing out my characters. Moving on. I know this video is getting long. We're already at 23 minutes, way longer than I intended, so I'm fixing to plow through this. And if you do want more in-depth, I will try to do another video on that. Leave me in the comments, let me know. But we're going to go ahead with this, and then I'm going to cut this video because I do not know how to edit. I cannot make it smaller for you guys. You know me, I'm just going to chat away. So I will cut this one after I finish, and then we'll move on maybe for a part 3 of this video, continuing to the next step in the process. Okay, so where were we? I also like to consider language, or their slang that they might use, any phrases or, speech that they might use. Now, this is something that you can consider also from, different regions have different dialects, or someone in the country might speak differently than someone, from the city. This is something that, in my own family, I like to keep this in mind when I do write certain characters, because this is just a little tidbit. My daughter, her half-sister, she called my daughter a long time ago when she was really small and wanted to speak with her. Now, I may talk fast now and you may not always hear my accent, but if I'm around some of my older relatives for, a substantial amount of time, I tend to adapt their accent, like really full-on, countrified, slow drawl, and I do say y'all a lot. So I may say, hey, Daddy, how you doing? You care if I come over for a little bit? And then also back to my daughter, her half-sister called her on the phone when she was little, and she's from Pennsylvania. And so her accent was quite different. And, she would say, hey, it's Crystal. I want to talk to my sister. Can you put her on the phone? So, the accents, these are things, slang used, someone might say, good golly, as opposed to, a curse word or something. Language also, bilingual, or, maybe a different foreign language that is spoken in the home. These are all things that you can consider for that further intimate development of your character. Consider the language they use or the language they speak, the slang or phrases that they repetitively use, or their speech. Do they stutter? Do they enunciate? Do they have a drawl? Anyway, so let's plow through this, guys. Okay, so then I like to consider their views and experiences on discipline, on consequences, on punishment versus rewards, equality, or any false belief that they may have about general society, or about life in general, or about themselves, or others. So, someone who believes in spanking a child, may differ just exponentially in someone who does not agree with putting your hands on anyone regardless. Maybe their form of discipline might have been, go stand in the corner, or maybe it might have been you're grounded or on restriction, or so this is something you want to keep in mind as well. Or maybe they have, long talks at a table, family meetings, or whatever. So this can also play into developing that character in their home lives if you do have parents or parental figures in your story, and if maybe your main character is a teenager or whatever. These would really come into play, so keep those in mind. Also, the view on the world, themselves, and others. This kind of falls into all of this as well. Any biases or opinions that they may have. Also think about the maturity level of your character. There's going to be a difference in maturity level based on the experiences, their education, their home life, their background, their history, their intellectual development. All these things play a huge, what responsibilities they might have been given could help them grow up a little faster, or, maybe some traumatic event that pushed them into, maybe in a role as, like an older sibling or something. Maybe their mother was a alcoholic or worked too much, or whatever the case may be, that made the oldest sibling become more of the caretaker. So this is another thing that would boost that maturity level. So anyway, on to the very last one, guys. We're almost done. Thank you so much for sticking with me. I'm going to try to power through this one as quickly as possible. Okay, so views on the outside or other worldly things, such as folklore or magic or creatures or karma. How do they feel about monsters or their fears or the cosmos, astrology, kismet, the universe, fairy tales, fate, destiny? Do they believe in ghosts or angels or demons or psychics or zombies or anything supernatural? What are their views on heaven and hell, or on God, or whatever? So these are all things that you can include. You don't have to include all of them, but when you're, first approaching your character and really getting them fleshed out and getting to know them on like a nitty-gritty kind of level, these things, these types of things, can really help you hone in to the core of that character to really get to know them intimately. So you might understand them better and know how they might act in any given situation. So anyway, you do not have to use all of these. I don't even use all of them included in my story, but sometimes these are just for me to keep in mind when I'm writing the character. You know, sometimes I can throw in a few things here and there in the story, just kind of give the reader a better idea of who they are, or put them in situations where these sort of things might come out. You know, just kind of play around with it, do what works for you. But this is how I do it. And so that concludes the part 3, fleshing out for our character development. Anyway, that's all I have for you today on that one. The video is incredibly long, so I'm going to go ahead and close this one, and I will see you in the next video when I come back to you with the 4th, which is the 4th in the series, when I clothe my characters, which I guess the video will be part 3. So thanks again, guys, for tuning in. I really appreciate it. If you like this sort of video, give it a thumbs up. Leave me some comments down below on what you think of this method, or if you think of any other questions that maybe you might ask your characters, or ask yourself when you're creating those characters. So that's all I got for you guys today. Hope this helps. If not, I'm sorry, guys. I'm just trying to help you understand my process. And if you can take anything away from this that helps you with yours, your process of character development, great. But anyway, that's all I have for you today. As I said, if you want to know when I upload a video, just, you know, ring that notification bell, and I'm going to shut up now. So have a good day. Thank you again, and I'll see you in the next one, guys. Happy writing. Bye.